Bobbins come in plastic or metal discs like this. They are specific to a sewing machine, so you want to make sure that you have the right size for your machine. And one of the first things we do when we're sewing is put thread on the bobbin for whatever project we're making. I have a spool of thread here. Now, this thread has a rough part at the bottom to secure the thread so that it doesn't unwind when you're storing them. And you want that rough part to be away from the way that the thread feeds, because the thread can get caught on that. And so whether you're sewing or winding the bobbin, when you put the spool onto the spool pin, the thread secured part of it should be towards the inside of the machine. And then you put the cap on. The flat side should be tight against the thread to hold it in place. Otherwise, the thread will pull off when you're winding the bobbin or when you're sewing. The next thing that you do on this machine, and almost on any machine, is you run your thread into the bobbin winder tension. There needs to be pressure on the thread when you're winding the bobbin. If the bobbin is too loose, it won't sew properly when you're sewing. Now on the Pfaff, the thread goes around the bobbin from the bottom to the top so that it actually crosses. Not all machines do that. If you have a different machine, check the instructions for your machine. Now, a lot of machines will say to wrap the thread around the bobbin when you start winding it. I find when I'm winding that if I do that, the thread will pull off when I start quite often. So I prefer to run my thread into an opening in the bobbin. And on these Pfaff bobbins, there's one on each side, but you need to thread from the inside, the center of the bobbin, to the outside when you do this. If you thread outside to inside, you can end up putting thread on the bobbin winder post instead of on your bobbin. So inside to outside, and then you want this thread coming through on the top, not on the bottom. Now, one thing also that this machine has is on this bobbin winder device, beside the post, there is a little tiny post that sticks up, and I need the hole on the back side of the bobbin to fit onto that post. And that helps to hold the bobbin in position. It won't wind if I don't do that. And then you take your bobbin and push to the right. And that's a very common feature on many machines when you're winding a bobbin. Now, this machine has one extra step. A lot of newer machines have removed this step. So when you push the bobbin over, it will disengage the needle. The needle should not be going up and down while you're winding a bobbin. It's a safety feature. It also saves wear and tear on the machine. If I were to start my bobbin right now, it winds, but see how the needle is moving up and down? It should not be doing that. I have to do an extra step. And again, if you have an older machine, you may need to do this as well. So if you look at the hand wheel on the side of the machine here, there's another little wheel in the center. This is called the clutch knob. And in order to disengage the needle, I hold the outer wheel so it doesn't move, and then I turn the clutch knob towards myself. And it's just a small turn. You can feel when it stops itself. You can't push it any further. And when I do that, now when I'm filling the bobbin, you want to hold this thread so it doesn't pull out, straight up so it doesn't get tangled. And see when I press the foot pedal? Now the needle is not moving. So then I hold this thread just until there's enough thread on there to secure it. And then take my scissors. You want to cut that thread as close to the bobbin as you can so that there's not a thread end on the bobbin. If there's thread hanging out of that, when you actually go to thread your machine, that thread can get pulled in while you're sewing, but it gets stuck basically, and it will cause your machine to jam. So you want to make sure you trim that off. I'm just going to use all the thread. There's not a lot of thread on this spool. And I'm just pressing my foot pedal. Now, if I filled this completely full, it would automatically push back and stop. Now, mine's not completely full, but you don't have to completely fill your bobbin. You can just stop and pull the bobbin back and then take it off. And if I still had thread on my spool, I would just snip it so that it was separate. And so that bobbin is ready, and we're going to now thread the machine. If I had just filled the bobbin and I still had thread on my spool, I wouldn't have to put it on again. I could just leave it there because the spool goes in the same place whether you're filling the bobbin or threading the machine. So thread on the spool pin. Again, this rough part goes towards the inside of the machine. Spool cap, flat side towards the spool, and I'm ready to start threading. The first thread guide on this machine is really, it doesn't look like a thread guide, but there's a little groove back here, and I'm going to run the thread into that groove. And that groove goes over to this slot right here. And this is a little different than some other machines that have this type of threading. Some machines go from right to left. The Pfaff goes over to the left and then works its way back to the right a little bit in the threading. So there's a slot right here, and you see that silver piece here? This is where the tension on this machine is. And basically I just run my thread down that slot, and it can go on either side of this piece of metal that's here. Both sides will work. Now this dial I call the do not touch dial for my students. This sets the tension, the amount of pressure on the thread here, and every machine is adjusted individually to have the perfect tension. And so if your machine's already been set properly, you don't want to mess with that. When you get more experienced, there will be times that you may change that. But as a beginner, I usually say don't touch that dial. I've come down this slot past the tension, and at the bottom here, I'm going to do a U-turn. So I go underneath this part that sticks down a little bit, and then I go straight back up the slot that's beside it. Now this slot has the take-up lever, but right now I can't see it, and you do need to be able to see it. So I'm going to turn my hand wheel towards myself, and there's something that I forgot to do after I wound the bobbin. Remember how we disengaged the needle? Well, I'm turning my hand wheel right now towards myself, and nothing's happening over here. And that's because I have to reset the clutch knob. So again, you just hold the hand wheel and turn the clutch knob away from you. And now when I turn that hand wheel towards myself, you can see how the needle is moving. And my take-up is now in the top position. And I need to be able to see it. So I'm going to take this thread, go behind the take-up towards the right on this machine, and pull so that the thread comes into the very front of the take-up. If the thread is not in that part of the machine correctly, it will cause a thread jam when you start to sew. This is probably one of the most common threading problems that I see, is forgetting to make sure your thread's in the take-up. And then you come back down the same slot. And this time I'm going to slide into this thread guide right here. At the top of the needle, there's another thread guide. Just slide your thread into that. And then the challenging part, you need to thread the needle. It threads from the front to the back, or it won't sew properly. Now, if you need more room, you can put your presser foot down. You should not thread the rest of the machine with the foot down, because when you put the presser foot down, it closes the tension discs and the thread might not go into them properly. So always thread the machine with the presser foot up, but you can thread the needle with it down. I like to put my finger behind it And it helps me to see the hole a little more easily in order to thread the needle. And then just pull it through. And foot back up. And then there's a groove in front of the presser foot. And I just like to run my thread through the groove and out behind the machine so it's out of the way when you're ready to sew. In a machine with a front-loading bobbin, the bobbin area has a separate case that the bobbin goes into before you put it in the machine. So there is a way to put it in the case if you want a proper stitch when you're sewing. So if you look at your bobbin, this thread is coming off of it. You do not want a P. Right now, this is what I call a letter P. You want a letter G. So you want the thread coming around to the right side of the bobbin over the top. So a letter G. And then if you look at the bobbin case, it has this open area in the top of the bobbin case. I'm going to hold it by the handle because in order for the bobbin to seat correctly, that handle needs to be open. And then you just place the bobbin into the case. If it doesn't fit, you might have the wrong size bobbin. It should fit nicely into the case. And then we're not done yet. There's another step. If you look at the side of the case, there's this little groove right here. This groove is where we guide the thread in order to put tension on the bobbin thread. So there's tension on the bobbin winding mechanism. There's tension on the thread on the top of the sewing machine, and there's also tension on the bobbin. So I'm going to just pull the thread into that groove, and then I pull it up, and I keep pulling towards the left because I want the bobbin thread to come out kind of underneath. There's a little hook and a hole there, and that's where my thread needs to be. Now, as I pull on this, the bobbin spins. You can see that, right? So I need to stop that spinning. So I'm just going to hold it with my finger here so that I can actually pull the thread into this area. And so there you want the thread coming right out of that hole. And then that thread can just hang. Now we're going to put the bobbin into the bobbin case. And so there's a hole in the center here that fits over the post that we see there. The opening should be at the top. And you just push it into position there. And it should fit nicely into it. See this little groove on the right side there? The handle points towards that, and that opening is at the top of the bobbin case. Now, we're not quite done. There's one more step. We want the bobbin thread to come through the hole that's under the needle. It's between the feed dogs. Now, in order to get it there, we're going to use our needle thread. You're going to hold the needle thread with your left hand and turn the hand wheel towards yourself with the right hand. Keep turning. The needle is going down. Now the needle's coming back up. And I'm turning until I see the take-up lever at the top. And then I'm going to pull on the needle thread, and I can actually see the bobbin thread here. It's the red thread. And then I can take a pair of scissors and just pull through. And there is my bobbin thread. And again, put the needle thread through the presser foot. Both of these go out back. And close this door. And on this machine, this is a little platform for a little more sewing space there. You can put that back into position.